Now, UNCTAD, with the support of GIZ, has developed a handbook for SEZs on the continent. The African Union Commission has been instrumental in developing this project. And with UNCTAD and GIZ, they've all been holding hands together to come together today for this official launch of the Handbook on Special Economic Zones in Africa, looking towards economic diversification across the continent. And I'm really pleased that we have eminent speakers with us here today who are going to officially launch the handbook. And we have a distinguished panel of guests with us who are going to share their insights a little later on into the SEZs and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And of course, today's event provides an opportunity to discuss all the points covered by the handbook with a wide range even of stakeholders, including high-level representatives from African member states, SEZ managers and SEZ associations. So without any further delay, let's get proceedings underway. And I'm delighted to welcome Ms. Isabelle Douin, the Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, and Ms. Tanya Gonner, who is the Chair of Management Board at GIZ, for their opening remarks today. Great to have you both with us. And Ms. Isabelle Douin, over to you first. Hello.
Thank you, dear moderator. So, Excellencies, speakers, participants, friends, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this high-level event of Special Economic Zones. Firstly, I would like to thank the German Development Cooperation Agency, GIZ, and the German Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development for their generous but also very fruitful support to UNCTAD. In addition to this financial support, I would also like to thank the African Union Commission and the Commissioner who is with us today for their joint support and collaboration, which enable us to prepare this famous Handbook on Special Economic Zone in Africa. So the Handbook provides best practices and policy recommendations across a wide range of topics relevant to SEZs. It presents innovative work on economic transformation, diversification and integration in Africa, and draws on our work for sustainable, inclusive and resilient development in Africa. It echoes the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as Agenda 2063 of the African Union. And I'm sure it will be a useful tool for policymakers, practitioners, and zones managers alike. I hope that it will be the case, and the discussion will probably demonstrate it. Africa is at the heart of UNCTAD's work, and this includes supporting Africa in maximizing the development benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Area. This AFCTA is an immense achievement, even if, of course, there is a long way to go. It is the world's largest free trade area, uniting 1.2 billion people. The AFCTA is set to lower trade and investment barriers within the continent and thus improve market access, relieve supply pressures, and force a more regional value chains. But economic integration, and it's a European one speaking about that, economic integration is a process which takes time and does not create equal benefit for all. To ensure that both bigger and smaller economies and groups can benefit from opportunities and costs are spread fairly, supportive policies are required. In this context, the handbook and the related technical cooperation activities undertaken, as well as our previous analytical work on SEZ, help SEZ adjust to the new trade and investment environment in Africa. For instance, our 2019 World Investment Report presented a comprehensive analysis of SEZs and their potential role as a tool for development and upgrading. Importantly, the report presented a concept of SEZs for sustainable development, the SDG model zones. The objective of the SDG model zones is to ensure SEZs work for sustainable development and move from privileged enclaves to provide widespread benefits. SEZs are an important tool for attracting finance, especially FDI. And foreign direct investment can promote technology transfer, skills development, and productivity. In Africa, we know that SEZs offer a pathway for countries to provide investors with targeted incentives, streamlined regulation, and better infrastructure that might not be possible at an economic-wide level. They have also proved successful in attracting foreign firms that are integrated in GBCs, leading to stronger manufacturing and export performance. Today, there are an estimated 237 SEZs and more than 200 single enterprise zones or free points in Africa. A total of 38 of the 55 African Union member states have SEZs, and countries without are now in the process of planning or establishing their first zones, often with the help of international partners. And some of those countries with many decades of experience in developing zones and are now transitioning towards more complex and specialized models of zone development. However, the development impact of SEZ is not as clear. With a few exceptions, the performance of African SEZs has so far been below expectation. And this even when considering the most direct economic gains from SEZs, such as increased FDI, export, and job creation. And this is why UNCTAD places strategic focus on analyzing investment, in particular in SDG relevant activities. But the system of international production and global value chains have seen challenges, even prior to the COVID-19 crisis. Notably, the new industrial revolution, growing economic nationalism and protectionism, and the sustainability imperative triggered by the climate crisis. These trends, of course, are changing the landscape while also offering opportunities. For instance, there is momentum for regionalization of value chains, and the AFCTA can be an important enabler for this development. In this 2021 World Investment Forum, we offer various activities related to special economic zone and how to use SEZ as an engine for the SDG. During this week, the Global Alliance of Special Economic Zones will also be launched. This is an initiative championed by UNCTAD in partnership with Regional and Global Association of SEZs. The Alliance will provide a platform to bring together financing partners, SEZ developers, host countries, and investment promotion agencies to create opportunity for networking with partners at international and regional levels for future work. So I wish you, I wish us, I wish UNCTAD, GIZ, and all the other partners fruitful discussion, and I thank you for your attention.
Ms. Isabelle Durand, thank you so much for your opening remarks. We're very grateful that you're with us here today. I'd like to now pass this session on to Ms. Tanya Gonner, the Chair of the Management Board at GIZ. Hello to you, Tanya.
Hello, Babita. Thank you for the kind introduction. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. A warm welcome to you all. First of all, I would like to offer my deep thanks to Isabelle Durand for United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and also His Excellency Albert M. Muchanga, Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining of the African Union Commission. Thank you to both of you for your dedication and commitment to this report. My thanks also to each of the panel members as well as to UNCTAD team for your extensive efforts to collect and analyze such a vast amount of information and produce this comprehensive report in a noticeably short amount of time. The impact and role of special economic zones for industrialization processes have been controversially discussed, and it has become clear that the success of such zones depends on a range of factors, including alignment with a country's comparative advantage, local economic integration, and political support. However, in developing countries, SEZs have become increasingly popular as an instrument of industrialization. In this context, it is then crucial that we fully understand the impact of SEZs as a tool of trade and industrial policy. This report provides valuable knowledge about successful cases from African and non-African zones and show more specifically what factors make a zone successful in a very hand-on and applied format. The report should be perceived as an orientation for African policymakers in the design and implementation of SEZ development programs or programs aimed at improving existing SEZs. Proactive and targeted policy measures are central to ensure SEZs become an instrument of policy to increase technical knowledge, innovation, and productivity, both inside and outside the zone. The impact of African SEZs for sustainable industrialization on the continent and the emergence of successful hubs in Africa will depend on capacity of policymakers to build consensus and buy-in from various layers of society and economic stakeholders involved in the various stages of the development of zones. To achieve this, it is crucial to align the incentives of key stakeholders while ensuring local economic integration of SEZs over time. The instrument of SEZs requires targeted political support and a high level of strategic flexibility to ensure that a given SEZ program effectively overcomes critical constraints to large-scale private sector investments. The dynamism of African regionalism can contribute to regional integration and specialization of African SEZs. Whether this will happen will depend on specific policy adjustments envisioned by the African Continental Free Trade Area. Germany has been supporting the AFCFTA negotiations and the African Union Framework Program boosting intra-African trade since 2015 through the German Physikalisch-Technische Bundesanstalt. You see, it's sometimes also for Germans not easy to translate our own names into English, better known as PTB, and through GIZ. Support to the AFCFTA is a priority of the German Development Cooperation. The German support is designed in a multi-level approach to enhance synergies continentally with our partners at the African Union Commission and the AFCFTA Secretariat regionally across 3 regional economic communities and at the national level in currently 8 focused countries. Capacity building national workshops in focus countries are scheduled for the dissemination at the findings of the Handbook on Special Economic Zones in Africa. New generation SEZ policies will have to be sustainable, responsive, and holistic to fulfill their mandates. The development of new SEZs will have to consider the changing situation with several megatrends shaping the restructuring of global value chains. Much work is going on to ensure that we can provide meaningful and relevant outcomes. So I hope that this report can be a reminder of what we can accomplish when we work together. And so thank to everybody, and hopefully we have fruitful discussions this evening, today, wherever we are. Thank you so much.
Tanya, thank you, and thank you for translating. It all came across perfectly from English to German and German to English, and I think that's wonderful. And to you and to Isabelle Durant as well. I love the optimism and I love the initiative of joint collaboration, because that's what it's all about really when we're here today. So with that, I'd like to thank both Tanya and Isabelle for officially opening the handbook for you all today. And it's on to our next speaker now from the African Union Commission. The AUC is partner and key supporter of the Handbook project. So please welcome His Excellency Alba Mushanga, the Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining at the African Union Commission, to tell us more. Hello, Alba.
Thank you very much, Director of this panel. I'm very happy to be here in this panel. And right from the beginning, I would like to thank our colleagues from GIZ and from UNCTAD for supporting us, specifically in the African Continental Free Trade Area. As indicated, Germany gave full support in the negotiations leading to the operation and start of trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area. And the UNCTAD also developed one of the instruments which will be very, very useful when we start trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area. We have started trading, but not on a larger scale. And this is the online mechanism on monitoring, reporting, and elimination of non-tariff barriers. Because in quite a number of cases, when you remove the tariff barriers, the non-tariff barriers are replaced by both governments and the private sector. And we see the official launch of the Handbook on Special Economic Zones in Africa, building on the workshop which took place in Ethiopia on the same subject. And I was able to participate in that workshops. And in our view, the Handbook is going to galvanize the process of making the African Continental Free Trade Area work much, much better with the introduction of special economic zones. And this is a market, as already indicated, which encompasses 1.27 billion consumers. And of course, with this market, we are able to now look at using regional and continental value chains to promote the processes of manufacturing, agro-processing, and also trade in intermediate goods. When you look at the structure of manufacturing across Africa, most of the intermediate products come from abroad. And these constitute a major cost element in the manufacturing process. And when we start now the process of promoting intra-African trade in the intermediate goods, the cost is going to be lowered significantly. And of course, the rules of origin are also very key in the development of the African Continental Free Trade Area market. They are the backbone of the whole market. And they also contribute to the development of regional and continental value chains. And then as we go towards the negotiations on how to treat special economic zones under the African Continental Free Trade Area, these are some of the issues that will come up in the process of trying to embed them as part of the whole processes. Beyond the development of regional and the continental value chains is the aspect that trade information is very, very, very key to ensuring that the consumers are connected to the products. And in this respect, we've been working since 2018 with the African Export-Import Bank and other key players, as well as the host governments, starting with Egypt in 2018, and now South Africa, to host the Intra-African Trade Fair editions. The first one was in Cairo in December 2018. And the next one is going to be from the 15th to the 21st of November in Durban, Natal. And Germany was one of the countries that we had approached to come on board, but we were told that because of the change of venue, it might not be possible. And at that fair, we hope to interest about 1,100 exhibitors from more than 55 countries. And we also plan to interest about 10,000 visitors. And among those will be buyers and sellers. And there was going to be a conference segment bringing 5,000 participants. And at the end of the fair, we intend to, or we target to generate trade and investment deals amounting to over 40 billion US dollars. When we were in Cairo in 2018, we had planned the 32 billion, the 25 billion, and we went above target to reach 32 billion. So now, so I'm being disturbed, somebody's knocking. Yeah. Of course, the issue of special economic zones is not something which is very easy. I'm sure this thing is going to come up. It requires in-depth study. And right now, as far as we are concerned in Africa, there are really few exceptional countries which are doing very well in this area. And these are Ethiopia and Mauritius. And the handbook, we hope, will be able to provide new insights to ensure that other countries can make use of them as they try to promote economic diversification and industrialization. There are a number of issues that we may need to consider in this panel. And some of the questions would be whether or not it's feasible to have regional special economic zones across the countries. Most of them now we have only national, but can we really try to move a little bit further and come up with regional economic, special economic zones? And another key issue we could consider is, should we really also look at clustering these special economic zones, or we develop them along value chains? And then since we are talking of one large market, the African continental free trade area, again, the issue of complementarity comes up. Should there be complementarity among those special economic zones? And of course, as earlier indicated, the issue of the fourth industrial revolution, and for us as Africa, the question of decarbonizing manufacturing is very key in the process. So these are my introductory remarks. I don't want to take much of your time. And let me end by saying, immediately after this, I'm required to join the AGOA ministerial meeting. So I will not be able to sit out through the panel discussion, but I've got the team from the African Union Commission who will be able to participate. Thank you for giving us the opportunity, and thank you, UNCTAD and German, for the support to the development processes in Africa. I yield the floor.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Before we let you go, seeing as I know that you have to leave this session, I would love if we could all turn our cameras on, panelists and speakers, please, so we can just have one lovely picture for the digital age that is social media, so we can all see that you are looking wonderful, and you are. So if I can just ask for all of our guests and speakers, please just for a few seconds to turn your cameras on so that we may take a quick picture before we let His Excellency depart this session. Is everybody switch their cameras on? Wonderful. Just a quick smile, and we say here cheese, but feel free to say whatever you'd like, and we'll take the picture. Hopefully, Aman, our wonderful organizer, will do it in the next 3, 2, 1. Wonderful. Thank you all so
Yeah.
much for that. Feel free to turn your cameras off if you're not on. But His Excellency Alba Mushanga, thank you so much for your insightful thoughts there. And really, it's given me much food for thought for our panel discussion in a few moments' time. So many thanks to you. We are also delighted today to welcome His Excellency Dr. Arkibe Okube, the Senior Minister and Special Advisor to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia and Mastermind of the Industrial Parks Policy in Ethiopia, for his remarks and presentation on the Handbook project. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Babita. Excellencies, my brother, Commissioner Albert, Tanja, and Isabel, and Excellencies, Ministers, and participants. It's an honor to join you on this forum to discuss a timely and important topic, special economic zones in Africa, driving economic transformation in the AFCFTA environment. Let me use this opportunity to thank UNCTAD for its far-reaching work on developing countries and the key role of productive transformation. I thank UNCTAD, the African Union, and GIZ for launching a timely handbook on SEZs in Africa and for hosting this event. Last week, an interesting article was published by Financial Times by its African correspondent, David Piling, with the title, How Morocco Transformed Itself into a Car-Making Hub. And this interesting story portrays the potential of special economic zones and industrial policy, because it's essentially a story of industrial hubs and industrial policy, because it's linked with the development of Tanger-Med ports, a complex, one of the largest in the region. It's about urbanization linked with Tanger city. It's also about building industrial capacity. It's also complemented with the construction of Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, which shows the synergy with education facilities as well. This tells us that it's possible to develop such special economic zones which can enhance special economic zones. Today also among the panelists, I have seen Ken from Mauritius, the CEO of EDB, who would be sharing us excellent experience on Mauritius. So this handbook is a very timely handbook. Africa's industrialization and economic transformation has gained an impetus in recent times. First, the debate and perspectives on economic transformation and the role of the state is gaining increased recognition, especially after the new millennium. Economic diversification and industrialization are critical for building a resilient economy, creation of decent jobs, and technological advancement. Industrialization is no more a luxury for Africa, and it's a pathway to the future. Second, the launch of African Continental Free Trade Area in 2021 by African leaders as part of the long journey towards the economic integration of Africa has accelerated the urgency of industrialization and the need to develop regional value chains. Africa must be able to position itself to reap benefits from its economic integration in catalyzing production and value addition. Third, more recently, the COVID-19 crisis has exposed the vulnerability of global economies and the economies of developing countries, particularly in Africa, where weak economic diversification and weak industrialization are key features of the economy. The crisis has showed us that economic diversification and industrialization is vital, and that industrial capacity and industrial policies matter. Within this context, the special economic zones agenda becomes crucial because industrial and productive capacity necessitate industrial ecosystem for technological learning and industrial upgrading. However, development of special economic zones must be based on knowledge, best practices, and policy learning. Unfortunately, we found out that the available research materials are not sufficient, and there is huge confusion within the concept of special economic zones or other similar terms like EPZ or industrial parks, industrial zones. Jointly with the former World Bank chief economist and senior vice president, Professor Justin Lin, we initiated an ambitious global research on industrial hubs to fill the knowledge gaps both in theory and practice of special economic zones, a synthesis of theoretical and empirical evidence and national experiences from all regions. The output, the Oxford Handbook of Industrial Hubs and Economic Development, is now available. But this work was incomplete without a comparable reference handbook on industrial policies. Together with Professors Hajun Chang, Christopher Kramer, and Richard Kozelwright of UNCTAD, we have completed this global research and is available in the Oxford Handbook of Industrial Policy. Over 130 international scholars have contributed around 100 research outputs to these works, and I believe both policymakers and researchers will be able to use these materials. These are recent, there are also recent pioneering examples to highlight the importance of innovative approaches to special economic zones. Unlike other African countries who had longer experience with special economic zones, Ethiopia was a latecomer and new to special economic zones. And it launched its new strategy on industrial hubs in 2014, after a critical review of lessons and learnings from 4 Asian countries, namely Singapore, China, South Korea, and Vietnam, and 2 African countries, Nigeria and Mauritius. It promoted through piloting and local experimentation, phased implementations approach, and also gradually developing capacities and enabling the development of national network of industrial hubs that are sustainable, that foster domestic linkages and meet international compliance requirements. Learning must be a key element of special economic zones approach. What have we learned so far? I would like to mention a few points. First, special economic zones are not an end by
Dr.
themselves.
Akibe, sadly, we are running out of time, I'm afraid, because we have to.
I'm just to the final conclusion.
Please, if you can, just as a final summary, it'd be great to get your final thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. The first one is special economic zones are not an end and must not be seen as a miracle bullet. The second element is we also need to complement with the development of infrastructure, urban policy, and national special plans, and also development of higher education. We have also to follow the path of carbon neutral industrialization to maximize sustainability, to develop from green transformation. Moreover, a diversified source of financing and multiple avenues to develop capacity will be required. Finally, I would like to highlight that African countries would be able to benefit from this new handbook on special economic zones on Africa, and they should further enrich in practice, and the Africa Union, African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, and other continental agencies will be able to contribute. Let me thank finally all the experts who have contributed to the preparation of this handbook. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akibe Okube. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being with us and your thoughts as well. We're going to be having a panel discussion in a moment, but before we go there, I just want to invite Honourable Michael Okieli Barfi, who is the Deputy Minister Designate for Trade and Industry from Ghana, who was the CEO of Ghana Free Zones Authority and has initiated several SEZs projects in Ghana to speak now. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for that wonderful introduction. Excellency Rebecca Grisman, Secretary General UNCTAD, Changa Gona, Chair of the Management of Board, GIZ, Excellency Albert M. Muchanga, Commissioner, Economic Development, Trade, Industry,
and Mining African Union Commission, Excellency Dr. Ankebe Okube Metiku, Senior Minister and Special Advisor to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to be part of this great and historical event, and I hereby take this opportunity to commend the organizers for a wonderful work done. SEZs are increasingly playing a key role in Africa's industrial transformation and economic growth. Liberia, Mauritius, Senegal, Ethiopia, South Africa, Morocco, and Egypt were the first African countries to set up world-class zones, attracting major companies and global investors. However, many of these African SEZs focus on textiles and agro-processing industry. There are three main business models applied to SEZ development in Africa. The first one is public operated SEZs, the most common model in Africa, accounting for about 42% of the total SEZs in Africa. The second one is the public-private partnership model, representing 30% of the total of SEZs in Africa. And of course, the third one is private operated models, representing 28% of the zones in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, let us ponder on these questions. One, what will the continent trade? What will the continent trade on in a post-African continental free trade area environment? Two, what are some of the strategies a country can adapt to improve the manufacturing industry's productivity and competitiveness? And how can one attract investment to the manufacturing sector? In answering these questions, one cannot ignore the important role of SEZs. They play a critical role in the provision of an exceptional and conducive environment for industrial development. African SEZs are currently acting as a catalyst to achieving African continental free trade area's objective of promoting industrial development through diversification and value chain development, agriculture development, and food security. There is no doubt that the dynamic benefits that come with spatial development can help in achieving the objectives of African continental free trade area and in ensuring structural growth and transformation in Africa. To achieve this, there's the need for a strong long-term vision and institutional support for the success of SEZs and development in Africa, coupled with effective cooperation between different levels of government agencies and the private sector. In addition, policy adjustments are urgently needed. The current state of affairs will not spare industrialization and promote Africans' active participation in global trade. In conclusion, SEZs are very important in transforming Africa's industrial base and fostering economic growth. While many challenges lie ahead, these zones can play a tremendous role in the development of the African continent under the African continental free trade area. Countries in Africa need to overcome many hurdles for their SEZs development, and they need strong and long-term strategies to unlock potential of the SEZs in their respective economies. Africa needs to harness the full potential of the SEZs as part of a successful transition to an industrialized and self-reliant continent. I thank you for the opportunity. We await the panel discussion session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us, Excellency Michael Okieri-Barfi. We appreciate your time. Thank you. Let's take a moment now to get an overview of the handbook's key values, its main conclusions, and indeed recommendations. And to do that, I'd like to give the floor over to Professor Andrés Rodríguez-Posey, the Princesa de Asturias, Professor of Economic Geography at the London School of Economics and Director, Canada Blanche Centre. Professor Rodríguez-Posey is the lead researcher for the Handbook project. Professor, over to you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Babita, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends. It's a great pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually, for the launch of this handbook. And I would like to thank, for what has been a truly collective endeavor, UNCTAD, GIZ, the African Union Commission, that have worked hand in hand in order to produce something that is, I think, very important for the industrial development of Africa. And I also would like to especially mention the people at UNCTAD with whom I have been working almost on a daily basis: Amelia Santos, Iman Radouan, Richard Baldwin, and of course, the team that has been working with me in London, Federico Bartolucci and Susanne Frick. Let me just share my screen to do the presentation about the essential aspects of the handbook. And it has been highlighted by several of the previous presenters that having a handbook on special economic zones in Africa is timely and is important, and I would say even crucial. And why is that? Well, because as has been mentioned, special economic zones have become a widespread, I would say even fashionable type of development tool in order to promote industrial development and generate innovation and investment in many parts of the world. And Africa is no exception. There are now, according to our calculations, 237 special economic zones in Africa, starting from very low levels of just 20 or around 20 in 1990, and with a rapid growth of programs, especially in the last 2 decades and fundamentally since 2010. Having said that, although the number may appear relatively large, we have to say that about only half of those zones are fully operational, mainly because many of them are still in the planning. We calculate that there are about 56 in a planning stage, and many of them are also still not fully completed. And there are also other types of zones, so single enterprise zones and free ports, about a bit more than 200, that are probably far too small to be classified as SEZs. But despite the fact that, as has been mentioned before, Africa represents a very large potential market of 1.7 billion people, these zones, they only represent 4% of the overall zones that we find across the globe. So Africa is, so far, in terms of using SEZs as a development tool, a relative newcomer and a relative small player, although that might be changing and might be changing fast. And why? Why are special economic zones so attractive for everyone, for decision makers? Well, because they are censored, they are likely to bring important benefits in terms of economic development. There are some static benefits that accrue to any SEZ, like, for example, the attraction of foreign direct investment, the capacity to attract and increase exports from the country where the zone is located to the rest of the world, and the idea that it does generate significant direct employment, which very often is relatively skilled and qualified employment, regardless of the level of the level of development of the zone. But on top of the static benefits that accrue mainly to the zone, we have a large number of potential indirect benefits, which is the capacity of, when you bring firms with a higher technological development, that this is going to contribute to the development of local skills, is going to lead to new innovations, new ideas, knowledge spillovers that would favor the industrial upgrading of economic activity locally. And when we put all that together, we have far greater socioeconomic development. However, and sadly, as was mentioned by Isabel Durant in her first presentation, the performance of African SEZs has been, in many cases, below expectations. And this is because a series of challenges that are not specific to the African continent, but perhaps are more prevalent in certain areas of Africa. One of the biggest challenges, or one set of challenges that is fundamental, are the zone-specific challenges, in which many African zones face significant problems of lack of locational advantages. Large parts of the continent have got not very easy access, for example, to ports, not very easy access to large markets, and that creates a disadvantage. Very often there is, like in other parts of the world, a mismatch between the sectorial focus of the SEZs being developed and the country's comparative advantage, creating a gulf that is difficult to fill. Lack of high quality infrastructure in many parts of the continent is also a drawback in terms of the capacity of many of these zones to grow and to compete in a more integrated world, participate in global value chains. Sometimes there's a failure to adapt services to the target industry, and that's creating problems. A widespread problem as well is the poor environmental, social, and governance performance of many of the zones across the continent, and which is often paired with a relatively vague business case determining the lack of financial viability of many of the zones that have been implemented, despite the fact that there are quite a few that have been successful. And the idea of the zones, which is mainly to create a favorable business environment vis-a-vis the surrounding economy, is very often curtailed by the fact that many zones are performing in terms of growth and employment generation at the same level of the country where they're located. And in some cases, as we have seen in this handbook, they perform even below the rest of the country. But there are just, as well as certain specific problems, there are SEZ program specific problems. And this is mainly because it has been the case that in many African SEZ programs, the particular SEZ or the program in itself is viewed as a standalone policy. Mr. Akebe and other participants have highlighted the need to integrate SEZ policies and strategies within the broader development strategies of the countries, and also at a Pan-African level. There's the case that in some countries, there's a lack of coordinated high-level political support, and very often there's a competition that is a zero-sum competition in which different countries try to attract investment to specific zones by having the similar value propositions, and in particular, as we're going to see in the case of Africa, an over-reliance on fiscal incentives that very often undermines the capacity of those zones to deliver, and also it creates significant opportunity cost. There are still, and despite the fact that Africa is moving towards greater integration with the African continental free trade area, remaining regulatory barriers that have prevented the local integration of SEZs. And very often what we find is that there's a deficient monitoring and controlling of the SEZs and little cross-institutional coordination that would facilitate the work that SEZs are doing. So overall, what we have is a specific problems that are associated to the programs and the SEZs themselves. But on top of that, there are mega trends that are going to represent a challenge for the development of the new SEZs wherever we are in the world. These are the sustainable development imperative that's becoming far more common, the new industrial revolution, and in specifically the case of Africa, trade integration, which is something that has been implemented already in other parts of the world to perhaps a greater extent. And here what we have is that the status quo in Africa is also somewhat unfavorable. In terms of the sustainable development imperative, the status quo of many African SEZs is that they have relatively low environmental, social, and governance standards. This represents a threat because the threat is that there are increasingly multilateral initiatives that try to curb these unsustainable practices in SEZs provoking very often the investor flight linked to the reputational risk for those investors. In terms of the new industrial revolution, many African SEZs have relied so far on low labor costs as a primary draw, but in the new industrial context at a global level, labor costs count for less and less, and what we are looking is more at skills, more at capacity to innovate, more at capacity to automate, and that is also going to create challenges for Africa. And specifically in the case of Africa, with the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Area, there's going to be a leveraging of trade preferences. We're going to go from, a leveraging of trade preferences with non-African countries, that was the norm, to a situation whereby African trade integration offers a big opportunity, but also represents challenges that would need to be harnessed in order to prevent a pure West competition between different countries and different special economic zones. So there's a need in Africa to shift towards SEZs that offer, on the one hand, more enhanced environmental, social, and governance structures. There needs to be a gradual technological upgrading of SEZs industrial activities, and much more, let's say, governance or cooperation opportunities in the form of Pan-African and cross-border cooperation to make sure that SEZs do not compete and race each other to the bottom, but they actually enhance and benefit the whole of Africa. So this has been the rationale for the handbook. First, because despite the effort and the promise that SEZs are bringing, many African SEZs still underperform. There are still significant challenges in designing and implementing the SEZs, and the emerging megatrends mean that there's going to be, to African SEZs, have to change gear and to move into a higher gear in order to be profitable and dynamic and dynamize the surrounding areas. So what we are trying to do, what I've been trying to do, is mainly to identify the best practices in the handbook, provide policy recommendations, and adjust to the emerging trends and capacity building programs. I know that time is limited. I still got about 20 minutes according to what I've been told. I'm going to focus on several or specific areas of the handbook. I mean, the handbook is already there. You'll have access, hopefully sooner rather than later. And I'm going to focus mainly on the overview of African SEZs, say something about the best practices, and provide some snippets of what are a large series of guidelines and policy recommendations included in the handbook. Let me just start with the overview of African SEZs. This comes from mainly doing an analysis of a survey, a large survey of SEZs that has been coordinated with UNCTAD, including virtually every single region of the African continent. And what we find is that in Africa, we have a multitude of very different types of zones, from the more traditional export processing zones to free zones to the standard SEZ type of development, but there's a dearth of other types of zones that have been far more common in other parts of the world, like industrial zones and free ports. In terms of what we find in our survey, we find more or less an equal matching in the governance of SEZs with SEZs that are being initiated by the private sector or the public sector. But there's still a limited number. We calculated it was 16% of public-private partnerships that are far more common in, let's say, more developed countries or in places like Southeast Asia, for example. And one distinct characteristic of African zones is that they, in many cases, are not specialized. Only 10% of the zones that we have looked at are specialized. Most of them are multi-sector, and there's a significant dearth of logistic hubs that actually play a very important role in zones in the case of Southeast Asia or East Asia. And still, they are relatively small. If you take a look at the number of firms in the zones, what we find is that 2/3 of the zones have got less than 50 firms, although in some cases the number of jobs is higher because, for example, in the case of Ethiopia, the zones might have a small number of firms, but these firms are relatively large. And what we find is that 50%, 49%, almost half of all zones are generate in terms of direct employment between 1,000 and 10,000 jobs. One particular problem, and I would insist on this for African zones, is in the terms of governance policies that are being highlighted. And they rely for the attraction of foreign direct investment on fiscal incentives and special customs regimes. Virtually all programs, 87%, offer significant fiscal incentives. Custom regimes is 73%. And the problem with that is that when you depend fundamentally on fiscal incentives, there's a problem that zones, not just across countries in Africa, but within the same country, may be competing with one another and trying to compete with one another. And that represents an opportunity cost, because you cannot invest those foregone fiscal revenue or those exemptions into other areas that are essential, not just for overall development, but also for the specific development of the zones. By contrast, there's much less emphasis on other aspects that have been proving key for the success of zones elsewhere in the world, like, for example, infrastructure provision or social amenities. There's also, in terms of the requirements in SEZ policies, a lot of focus on the establishment requirements. In the case of Africa, this is not different from the rest of the world, in which almost 3/4 of all programs, 70%, have specific establishment requirements, but there's much less emphasis on the expectations to contribute to development goals and performance requirements, in which only one in two of each program actually has a role or has requirements, for example, to contribute to overall development goals within the region where the SEZ is located or in the country. So if we can get some takeaways from the overview of zones in Africa, is that, yes, SEZs are on an upward trend, and this might be good. This offers opportunity and promise, but that so far there's significant room for improvement, because there's a relatively low performance vis-a-vis what's happening in other parts of the world in terms of firm attraction and job creation. And also, perhaps the instruments to attract investment to the zones are over-rely on fiscal incentives and more restrictive type of instruments vis-a-vis what's happening in other parts of the world. So what can we say, and what can we learn from what's happening, the best practices of what's happening in SEZs in Africa and in other emerging countries? And I said the best practices because, although I have highlighted, as has been highlighted previously by other speakers, that overall SEZs in Africa are overperforming, there are quite a few examples of zones across many parts of the continent that are doing well and can actually present lessons that can be learned for existing zones that are underperforming, but especially for those that are coming, that are being either built at the moment or are in a planning stage and will be developed in the future. And this is something that we have covered across the whole of Africa, as you can see here. And we have structured these lessons that come from all these best practice experiences along 6 different dimensions. We first look at how can African zones play to their strengths, how a united team actually facilitates the development of zones and the success of zones, how linking the zone to the place where it is located makes a big difference in terms of economic outcomes, how can you tap into outside experience, how can you become green and social, and how can you get the full benefits in terms that the zone not only generates direct benefits to those working in the zone, but they also create a spillovers that benefit the economy in a much more widespread way. We have focus in different zones in different parts of Africa for the different dimensions that we are highlighting here. But let me start with play to your strengths. There's often, what I think is a mistaken view from what we have seen from experience in many parts of the world, not just in emerging countries, but also in developed countries, are trying to bring in zones that are technologically advanced, but are completely disconnected to the country endowments. There are significant analyses that have gone on and on saying that these become high-tech fantasies, that in the end, they do not contribute to the development of the zone in the short term. That very often it's better to focus on bringing in zones that are connected to the local endowment, to the local conditions, focusing on the country's comparative advantages. And when you do that, you can start increasing the technological complexity and then also start diversifying, which is something that was a path that was followed by the Asian tigers in their path to success, which took a relatively short period of time in historical terms. But in order to do that, you need a serious comparative benchmarking and country diagnosis, which is crucial to provide zones with the right direction and orientation, which is something that, unfortunately, not just in Africa, but in many other areas where zones are being developed, is found missing. But once you get the comparative benchmarking and the country diagnosis, what you can do is determine whether the focus for a country should be on low and high value added, and what is the path to development, in order to make sure that whatever the focus is, that you increase the complexity and generate more innovation that is going to trigger that capacity to generate more growth and economic development in the long run. In terms of uniting the team, one fundamental problem that we have found has been that very often the policies were not coordinated, they were piecemeal, and there was not a very high level support. The successful African cases are those that have been inserted within integrated policies, as Mr. Arkeva was highlighting before, not just standalone policies. When you integrate special economic zone programs within the broader development strategy of a country, you're much likely to be successful. That implies that you need an investor-centric, whole-of-government approach to invest in promotion with the highest political backing, in which all, let's say, agents from the private sector at the local level to the public sector, but also vertically from local governments, regional governments, national governments, and the African Union are coordinated in order to make sure that the zones have got a chance of succeeding. But that doesn't mean that the SEZ authority should be influenced all the time by higher levels of government. They should be shielded from vested interests. The coordination should provide the guidelines, should provide the framework for zones to attract, but zones should have some autonomy in order to achieve their goals and pursue their objectives with a certain level of autonomy. In terms of knowing your place, and this is important, it's related to what I was saying at the beginning. There's a need to adapt the zones to both what is the country context, but specifically the local context. African countries have got complex economies, so when you do a zone in one area of a country, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as in another area, but also you have to target and adapt it to the target investor profile. And in order to do that, you need a series of measures, which can range from infrastructure and the right infrastructure, which is the adequate one for the target investors, other targeted measures very often linked to skills and addressing key constraints, like, for example, constraints linked to isolation and poor geography, but also red tape, excess bureaucracy. And one recurrent complaint across all zones is providing the adequate levels of skills, training, and education of potential workers to the zone. There's a need also not just to rely on internal resources, but to tap into outside experience, which means learning from good practice elsewhere in Africa, elsewhere in the world. This is one of the objectives of the handbook. Promoting and fomenting border and cross-border partnerships, and acknowledging, and this is an important step, that knowledge transfers from the zones to the surrounding economy do not happen automatically. That there's a need, in order for the wider benefits to be reaped, to institutionalize the knowledge transfers through formal mechanisms, and that implies the creation of clear coordination frameworks to avoid recurrent problems that have been highlighted in many of the zones of misalignment of objectives, cultural misunderstandings, and conflict of interest. As I said before, there's also a need to upgrade in terms of the green and social standards, because of not just the big benefit they will bring to African economies, but also because of the reputational cost of poor green and social standards and governance standards to potential investors. And there's always the perception that if you go green or you improve workers, not always, but very frequently, that would be costly and that would undermine the competitiveness of the zone. I think that's a mistaken view, mainly because if in a world in which we care much more about the environment, we care much more about social standards, this leads to much greater improved resource efficiency. And when SEZs become much more orientated towards the Sustainable Development Goals objectives, they become much greener, they become much more socially oriented, they are going to have bigger markets, and that's going to have a positive impact on economic development. And finally, there's, in order to get the full benefits, you need to consider the zones holistically within the territory in which they are located. Just co-location, putting firms together within a zone, is not likely to spur collaboration, and is less likely even to spur collaboration between firms in the zone and firms outside the zone. So you need to create linkages, you need to create the conditions to make sure that that works. So in order to do that, what we have done, and the analysis in the handbook is clear, we have done the steps in which probably need to be followed in order to make sure that the zones actually work and work adequately, in which you will have strong strategic country assessments that lead to an SEZ policy design that's integrated with other policies, and then you need to zone-specific policy design. And in the whole process, you need to consider the institutional considerations throughout, because SEZs represent a great opportunity, but they are not a panacea for growth. In many emerging countries, they are underperforming, and we are finding that the zone growth, although high at the beginning, is very difficult to sustain over time. And if you want them to have an impact on the surrounding areas, you need to address the whole strong distance decay effect and tailor the zones to the specific country's context, avoiding a one-size-fits-all for the whole of Africa for specific countries that might lead to wasteful policies. In doing that, you need to think about what are the lessons, and we have 24 lessons that come out that are developed in detail in the handbook in terms of what do we know for the country. So enough attention to what are the key drivers, for example, look at the SEZ policy design, tailor the SEZ to the conditions and the country characteristics, monitor how they are doing, think big about big special economic zones because they work normally better. Look at the specific zone setup, what type of services, what type of infrastructure, what type of skills are needed, and throughout the whole process, look at coordinating the political support, look at placing sufficient emphasis on investment promotion, on financial and administrative support to the zones while keeping the right autonomy. So in order to conclude and to highlight, I would say that SEZs are an opportunity and they should be developed. But they can be very, very effective tools to attract foreign direct investment, to create jobs, and ideally to upgrade the local industrial fabric across many parts of Africa. But the success is not warranted. It is conditional on factors that are indigenous, where Africa and African countries, specific African countries, can make a big difference, but also a lot of exogenous factors in which Africa does not have the control, but can help influence processes at a global level. And in order to make sure that SEZs and SEZ development deliver on their promise across the whole of Africa, there's a need for this proactive and concerted effort by government and local actors to address what are the key impediments to this process. Africa is, in this respect, at a crossroads. It has a great opportunity, and the African continental free trade area represents an opportunity to make the most of the promise that SEZs can deliver. But in order to do that, it has to get it right. And getting it right implies having SEZs that are within holistic policies, so they are integrated in large development strategies. They are sustainable, that they move towards more enhanced environmental, social, and governance standards. And they have got, and they are given the freedom and the wiggle room to become adaptive, that they can adapt to what is a relevant change in reality within the country where they're located at the whole African level, but also that they're capable to react to challenges that very often come at a global scale. So thank you very much for your attention.
Professor Andres Rodriguez Fossé, thank you so very much for that hugely insightful conversation there, really giving us much food for thought on special economic zones. In a moment, as promised, we're going to hear from our panel, who I'm sure going to pull upon much that a professor has just spoken about. But first, I have the pleasure in welcoming Mr. Ahmed Benis, the General Secretary, African Economic Zones Organization. And Mr. Benis was unable to make it today due to prior commitments, but he has kindly recorded a message for you all today on the success factors of special economic zones and really how they can contribute to the realization of the objectives of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here with you today and take this opportunity to address special thanks and congratulations to the UNCTAD team and their partners for the organization of this outstanding panel. My name is Benis Ahmed. I'm the Secretary General of Africa Economic Zones Organization, the continental association leading public and private institutions in charge of the development, management, and promotion of economic zones across the continent. We have been supporting economic zones development for more than 6 years now, bringing together more than 80 members representing 42 countries. And through a comprehensive action plan, we contribute to expertise sharing, capacity building, duplicating best practices, and connecting with international business network. As of today, and based on this year's edition of the African Economic Zones Outlook, we counted 203 operational SEZ and 73 projects that have been announced for completion. Northern Africa accounts for the largest share with almost 29% of the total SEZ developed in the continent, followed by Eastern Africa 26%, Western Africa 24%, Southern Africa 15%, and 6% for Central Africa. SEZ are also found and well developed in 47 of the 54 economies of the continent, with the highest number in Morocco and Nigeria. More than 146,000 hectares of land have been dedicated to the implementation of the Economic Zones Facility, with more than 50% assigned to agro-processing in Western Africa. But since its inception, the SEZ have given a significant boost to FDI flows, creating an attractive investment conditions and supporting job creation. And over the past 5 years, 60 million jobs have been created in agro-processing, industrial field, and services. And several SEZ have played a key role in the structural transformation, promoting greater participation in the global value chain. But however, for every successful project, multiple others have not attracted the expected investment, and some have even ended in a costly failure. So African economic zones appear to have struggled for a variety of reasons. Some of these factors are particularly specific to the zone or to the country, but many of them are common to zone programs across the continent. The challenges for the African economic zones is not just a matter of attracting investors or joining the global value chain, it's about increasing the share of the value added created locally and moving up to the chain hierarchy from a simple to more complex activity. Although there is no one single model and no one-size-fits-all solution to SEZ development, there are a number of key success factors that governments, operators, and investors could implement in the design, implementations, and operation of SEZ program. Let's pick up some of them. The first one, the SEZ project needs to be programmed, designed as a core component of a national economic strategy, driven by a range of government departments and agencies. Second, it's important to determine the right type of SEZ development model, and this should be aligned with the policy objective. Flexibility in the model development is important to promote the most attractive value proposition to the market and identify target industry sector. The legal and fiscal framework should also consider the investor requirements and define responsibility of the different stakeholders, the zone manager, the developer, the investors, and the incentive should not be used as the main differentiator between the competing zone. For the site selection and the zone project should be designed to make the most of the pre-existing asset and advantages, such as the presence of existing infrastructure, mainly ports or airports that offer an international connectivity. But when designing the SEZ program, consideration should also be given to trade policy, strategic and sectorial focus, the zone typology, policies on domestic participations, and policy on access to local market, with the objective to ensure favorable conditions for facilitating backward and forward linkages between the SEZ and domestic economy. Last, the provision of high-quality infrastructure and the one-stop-shop services are key comparative advantages when looking to attract inward investment and FDI in SEZ. The significant growth of economic zones is part of a new wave of industrial policy and a response to trade globalization. And the Continental Agreement created an enormous single market uniting 1.2 billion people across the 54 states with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion US. And it forecasts today a boost of 50% of the intra-African trade to reach up to $16 billion US. And this covers several areas of interest to economic zones operators: duty-free treatment of goods, rules of origin, custom cooperation, trade facilitations, non-tariff barriers, the legal framework harmonization, and compliance with international standards. And when African SEZ trade with themselves, they exchange manufactured good and processed good, support the knowledge transfer, the expertise sharing that would lead to complementarity and diversification of the value chain. But the real test for the CFTA will be how quickly African SEZ can accelerate export diversifications and product sophistication and make trade more inclusive. This refers to product upgrading, productivity, and increase of the overall value of export. A good demonstration is made by countries that have well-established SEZ program and manufacturing exports, such as Morocco, South Africa with their automotive experience, and Ethiopia with the success of the textile and garment industry. The same conclusions have been shared in the survey conducted jointly between Africa Economic Zones Organization and the UNCTAD, and the result of this report confirmed and highlighted the key concerns of the SEZ with regards to the challenges of the zone performance. It also demonstrated that beyond the numbers, the future of SEZ will depend on decisive actions and the collective efforts of the African member state. Concrete policy measures and investment policies are needed to ensure that women, business owners, and workforce can better be involved and integrated in the SEZ development. To conclude, SEZ today can play a game-changing role in Africa's economic diversification and inclusions, in providing end-to-end solutions and services that support industrial upgrading and FDI attractiveness. It also improves manufacturing and transformation capacity. And last but not least, it would definitely lead to enhance the Africans' livelihood. This is definitely an opportunity not to be missed, and it's a window of time for the economic zones leader. So through effort, resources, talent, and knowledge sharing, we can affect change in accomplishing and developing the SEZ, as well as supporting the vision of creating one African market under the CFTA that stand for making a significant contribution to reducing trade transaction costs and facilitating cross-border trade. So we look forward to the success of this important meeting, and I wish you a fruitful deliberation. Thank you.
Ahmed Beniz, thank you so much. Grateful for your thoughts there. Now, as promised, we are going to move on to our panel discussion, and please let me introduce them for you today. We have with us Mr. Haruna Niang, a consultant and former Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment Promotion of Mali. Also joining us is Ken Punasami, the CEO of the Economic Development Board of Mauritius. Amy Jadasimi is with us today, the Managing Director of Ladol Free Zone in Nigeria. And Pierre Vogue is with us, the CEO of Atlante Special Economic Zone in South Africa. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I just want to begin my first question, if I can, and I'm just conscious of time. So if I ask you all to be as succinct as you can in your responses to the questions. But Haruna Niang, I'll start with you when we speak, and we've heard much about cross-border zones and how they can really offer economic benefits by capitalizing on those existing trade corridors. We've seen that in its operation in the first cross-border zone in Africa that was launched back in 2018, the Skibo Triangle. I'm wondering if you can share with us, please, the development of the Skibo cross-border zone and what the main challenges were in terms of moving that project forward. That's to Haruna Niang, if you're there. Hello. Okay, I think we're having a slight technical issue there, bringing Haruna Niang to the conversation. So we'll come back to that. But Amy, let me bring you in here, because I know that a number of SEZs in Nigeria are having interesting examples of zones that, rather than serving as a low-cost global export hub, as we call it, they've had relative success in kind of leveraging their strategic position within the regional context. So when we look at Nigeria and the role that SEZs play there, what do you understand to be the support that the country's position can give in terms of creating that regional trading hub?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on the booklet. So firstly, the great thing about this whole conversation is that it creates a framework and a standard that free zones across Africa can now use to put in place specific developments that will aid in intra-Africa trade based on made in Africa products. So with that in mind, when you look at a country like Nigeria, it absolutely makes sense in terms of our population, our geography, the actual and potential size of our economy. Nigeria is the hub for the region and one of the major industrial hubs for the continent. In order to achieve that, we need more investments, and I would say particularly private investments going into Nigeria. Free zones across the country, as you say, have already specialized based on their geographic location to an extent. We are now kind of in a situation where our government is rapidly developing more public zones and rapidly developing particularly the Nigeria Export and Processing Zones Authority is rapidly developing new frameworks to increase investments into the zones and strengthening our existing frameworks so that we can expand the level of private investment as well as public investment going into zones. So if you look at a zone like Ladol, which is on the coastline in Lagos, the capital hub, the commercial hub of Nigeria, and we're also a port facility.
Sadly, I think we've just got a bit of dropout on Amy's connectivity there, but really interesting hearing Amy's thoughts, particularly about the strategic position there. I can see that Haruna Niang is just juggling things here, and we're going to come to you in a moment, but let me just bring in Ken Punasami here, because Ken, when we look at Mauritius and the export processing zone that was established back in, 1971, it was one of the oldest SEZ programs in Africa, and it's often been cited as one of the most successful. That carries with it a burden of responsibility, I'm sure, but I'm just wondering if you can share with us the experience of that in developing the sort of bilateral conversation we're having about SEZ programs in Africa today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to be on the panel. The export processing zone, in fact, for Mauritius, when it started, as you said, in 1971, and I could not agree more with all the different speakers before that, it created a framework to attract foreign direct investment and to boost exports. And this is precisely what it has been doing. But I would say that for it to be successful, there has to be political leadership. There has to be also a market access, which is guaranteed. And the success of Mauritius has been a combination of providing a conducive business environment, political endorsement for such a program to happen, and also market access, where we had certain guaranteed markets. And along with that, the investors see in it a real business proposal, not only in terms of providing a business ecosystem, which is very conducive, but at the same time, guaranteeing that the political leadership and the commitment of government will carry through all the initiatives in the scheme. So moving forward, the export processing zone has enabled Mauritius to move in terms of its development from an agro-industry to textile apparels, and then we moved into services. And in 1992, we created the commercial free zone. And the commercial free zone has actually positioned Mauritius as a springboard for cross-border trade between Asia and Africa. And along with that, I must say that there has been an important, I would say, connection with the global value chain, because that enables the commercial free zones to attract investment, to attract businesses, to locate in those zones. But moving forward now, I feel it is essential, because as we get into the implementation phases, we see that standards and norms, and we have to be aligned, because very often there is this debate whether the economic zones will have special treatment, and all the rest of the businesses outside the zones will have a differentiated kind of acceptations. So that is something which we are very much concerned with, and therefore the national treatment becomes essential. Now, linking that, perhaps, if I may, with the...
Yeah, I'll come back to you, Ken, if that's okay. I just want to, because we cut off Amy a little earlier because her line broke, but Amy, just a thought from you before I move on to our two other panelists here. You were talking about your concerns with regards to the positioning that you are in the regional context. Just to conclude that for me, that thought, before we move on. If you can just switch, Amy, I think you're on mute there.
Okay.
Lovely, wonderful.
I think we'll get there this time. Sorry, I'll quickly conclude. I think what we're going to see in Nigeria, because of the potential, the importance of the country, is increasing investments in parallel different regimes in public and private zones. Ladol is a private zone in a port, so you'll see us continuing to invest in high value manufacturing, imports and exports. And that high value is important because that's what triggers downstream activities to take place outside of the zone. So you have a multiplier effect coming out of some of these zones. We will also see zones that are mono-industrial, so zones that only do textiles. We will see zones that focus on a center of excellence in one field, for example, healthcare focused zones. And we will see zones that focus on a range of different solutions for different industries that may be inland as well. Okay. So in a country like Nigeria, you have widespread potential, but what this handbook does is enable us to create specific business models that are validated by the standards set in the handbook, and through which we can attract a lot more local investment to create these new zones.
Okay, many thanks for that. That's a really interesting point. Pierre Vogue, I want to just come to you. The Atlantis SEZ in South Africa was the first eco-industrial park in the continent that is fully focused on the attraction of green industries. So can you explain just a little bit about what that concept entails for those that don't know, and also what the challenges have been for you in terms of thinking about the implementation and the ethos of what you're trying to do? Oh, Ken, just a reminder just to unmute yourself so we can hear your lovely dulcet tones. Thank you.
You're quite right.
Pierre, yes, thank you, Pierre.
You can hear me? You can
You
quite
can.
right. It's South Africa's first green tech SEZ, and also the first green tech SEZ in Africa. It was conceptualized due to South Africa's very prominent focus now on renewable energy with the national government's renewable energy program. South Africa is the world's 14th biggest emitter of carbon, very dependent on coal. And I think there's a strong realization on South Africa that it needs to move on. And the Atlantis SEZ is probably a very strong part of that renewable energy program of the national government. It's not only about attracting green investment, it's also about making the SEZ itself sort of managed very strongly from a green point of view in terms of resource efficiency, water and waste energy, and also being socially inclusive, and to make the SEZ itself, the management of the SEZ itself, a low carbon sort of management area. Atlantis, Babita, is 40 kilometers outside of Cape Town. It already is a massive industrial zone. It's been there for the last 30 years. And we have now unlocked 118 hectares of SEZ land designated as an SEZ, of which 25 hectares is already built up. The biggest investor is the Stump renewable energy wind turbine manufacturer. It's South Africa's, probably Africa's biggest manufacturer of steel wind turbines. Our challenge now lies in unlocking the 94 greenfield land that we've obtained from the city of Cape Town. So we're quite motivated around attracting green investment, which we have already. 25 hectares, as I said, of the 118 hectares is built up already. And the challenge now not only to attract green investment, applying very strong green criteria, but also manage the SEZ from a very green tech management point of view. Okay. So we're trying to create an industrial park of green.
Forgive me, Pierre, I'm going to have to just bring in Haruna Nyang here because I'm just conscious of time. But Haruna Nyang, I'm grateful that you're here and that the technology is allowing us to speak to you. It's great to see you. I wanted to ask you about the Skibo Triangle and the development of that in West Africa, and really how that has advanced, and really what the main challenges you faced in moving that project forward.
Yeah, Madam, allow me first to thank you and to thank all the organizers of this forum panel discussions. I would say that I'm very happy, to see what is happening, and I can say that there is a consensus on the SEZs as a tool for development, for industrialization of Africa. And everybody knows that one of the problems of Africa is really that we are not industrializing at the necessary speed. And that, as a consequence, is having a lot of problem in terms of employment of youth and bringing a lot of problems. So for me, the SEG is a tool that can help to solve it. Now, there are a lot of challenges, as many people have said it. And one experience that we had is cross-border SEZ. To my knowledge, it is the first one worldwide. I haven't seen different countries agree to join together and to create a SEZ. It is a case here between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Cote d'Ivoire. And it's called Sikobo. The three cities that are surrounding, the zone. Basically, they have a common culture. It's the same people from across the board. So it's the base for thinking that we can put together something and help really bring in more investment, create more jobs, and bring development to the area. Now, the challenges that we are facing, that's why I think that we need coordination not just within the country, but between countries and also between regional entities and with the donors, UNCTAD, GIZ, World Bank, all of that have to support, this, because one of the problems that we are facing now is, we need financing really to put this in action. And financing issue, our thought is to have a PPP. Maybe we can draw some developers that would come and accept to invest. This is open, yeah.
Yes, I think there's a consensus building here, which is that actually a unified response and collaboration and actually support from a wider community is really key here. Ken, I just want to come back to you, please, Punasami, because you were talking very much about learning from the inception of what's gone on before and moving forward. So if you can, just your final thoughts on that, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I was just saying that moving forward now, I feel the free zone, the way we see it, the commercial free zone, should be really integrated and as an instrument to connect and link to the global value chains. And they should become nodes of competitiveness and how do we drive businesses globally. And along with that, I think with the Continental Free Trade Agreement, there is a lot of opportunities for us. How do we make sure that the Continental Free Trade Agreement and the SEZ and the Special Economic Zones and the Freeport can play a significant role? So we're talking about national treatments, and we're also looking at how the rules of origin for products which are manufactured in SEZ, in commercial free zones, can actually be exported. So I would say that there is really an alignment with the Continental Free Trade Agreements and also the instrument which the SEZ and the commercial free zones can play. And this is how we're conceiving it moving forward. Because to be honest, looking at how we can have differentiated fiscal policies, fiscal incentives between free zones and the domestic economy moving forward, in my opinion, might not be sustainable. Sure. In view of the global standards and norms which are happening. And therefore, to sustain those growth poles, it is important that we look at how we craft a competitive advantage. These are some of my thoughts on this topic. Yeah,
very interesting. And actually, I can see a unified nod of heads there, agreeing with what you've said. And Pierre Vogue, just your thoughts on what Ken Punasami has just talked about in terms of achieving that sort of sustainable remit there and staying true to the very essence of what we're trying to do here.
I think Ken is quite right. I think the big challenge for us is to be less dependent on government, to pull in the private sector much stronger, and to create a bit of a hybrid model using government funding, but also the private sector becoming a strong partner in going forward. And also from our point of view, I think it's important for us to be associated much more with Africa. We are Africa. Sometimes in South Africa, we still forget we are from Africa. And I believe that Atlantis SEZ can become not only a green SEZ for South Africa, but also for the rest of Africa. But I agree with Ken. I think the initial idea in South Africa was to have very strongly government-supported SEZs. As an SEZ ourselves, we want to move away from that and create much stronger partnership with government, becoming a co-investor in those SEZ to become less dependent on traditional government funding.
Okay, I'm conscious of time here, but I would like to ask all of you, and if you can just very briefly, if there was a wish list of the wants that you would like to have when it comes to the implementation of this handbook, what would be your key points that you'd like to share with us? Amy, to you first, if you can, please.
Thank you. I think what private sector needs is investment that is fit for purpose, meaning we need investment based on a market case. And I think one of the speakers said earlier, the money coming into Africa is coming in on much more onerous terms than are necessary. So the implementation of this handbook needs to lead to the adoption of these standards as a way of enabling free flow of investment into the hands of private free zone developers across Africa on a much less onerous basis.
Okay, very well put. Investment that is fit for purpose. And I think that's key, isn't it? Haruna Nyang, your thoughts on really just the one thing that you would really like to see come to the top of the agenda when it comes to implementation of this?
Yeah, I think for this handbook, if we can lead to more coordination between the donors with the regional entities and local government, so that at least, you know, most of the problems that we are facing can be identified and put into a strategy that you know, can be implemented. Because if we do things each by its own, I don't see a lot of synergy, and I think we run into problems.
Absolutely.
But if we try to create some synergy between what, you know, UNCTAD is doing, between what, you know, World Bank is doing, and this policy that can help into bringing industrialization, bringing, creating jobs, so all tied together.
Yes.
But what is missing is this coordination effort.
Okay.
So what I want is to see maybe one of the donors, maybe World Bank or UNCTAD, can, you know, help into how to coordinate all this.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thank you. Leading greater coordination from the handbook, I suppose, is one way that we can be more powerful as a united family. Pierre Vogue, just please, briefly, if you can, a thought in terms of your one big wish that you'd like to see happen here.
Very quickly, we, an emerging economy, South Africa, an SEZ is putting policy into practice, and you need a government to have consistent policy. And when you're an emerging economy, you often change your policy. It's very important for national government to have a consistent policy in place to enable that SEZ to put that policy into practice.
Very well put, policy into practice, and obviously with the government incentive and support behind you. And Ken, just a thought from you, please, finally, just to wrap this up for us, the wish list, you know, if there is a mantra that we can really unite on, what would it be? Oh, if you could just ask you to unmute yourself, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
From my perspective, I think predictability and certainty would be the keywords. And along with that, I would say it is essential, especially with what we have endured with the COVID pandemic, is how do we ensure that we leverage on technology to have the special economic zone and the commercial free zones across the African continent to be more competitive and connected to the world.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point there about technology. And I think if I'd like to add one to there, which is just having a unified approach when we think about climate change and sustainability and moving forward as well, because that is absolutely very key to everything we are doing at the moment. So investment fit for purpose, as Amy said, leading greater coordination, as Haruna said, policy into practice, government support, as Pierre said, and the technology, predictability and certainty that Ken has just outlined there to really, you know, see this flourish if we can give it the best start possible. I'd like to thank you all so very much for being part of this event. I'm so thrilled to have been able to chair this and to really share with you this official launch of the handbook. It's clearly an incredible body of work, and I know that the conversations are going to continue absolutely as we move forward. And my thanks to all of the panelists and the participants for joining us for today's launch. And before you leave, just a reminder that you can download the handbook right now on the UNCTAD website. And there is much more there you'll be able to see on the report findings. There have also been, as we heard a little earlier, a series of webinars and national workshops in different parts of Africa, including last month in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And I'm pleased to say the next one will be held in Niger on November the 22nd. So more information on the UNCTAD website there. Of course, there is plenty more opportunities, learning opportunities for the SEZs community, with a whole track scheduled for this week's World Investment Forum, including a session on SDG model zones on Friday, that's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And also today, straight after this session, you can join in on the innovation parks and areas of innovation here in this room 02. It's been a pleasure of mine to moderate this session. And thank you so much for all of your time and participating in today's event. For myself and the team, goodbye and thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.